Welcome back to Frontier Mysteries. The 1800s. The Rising Frontier. When you think of the most feared people during this time, you may imagine a gang of outlaws or a tough sheriff upholding the law. You may also imagine them with a gun, ready to deliver justice to such nefarious criminals while on a horse. But there was a group of people you may not have heard of who were even more feared. Even if you have heard of them through the media, you probably don't know much about them. They are a mystery, a private police force, and they did not mess around when it came to justice. We are talking about the Pinkertons, an organization that was feared throughout much of the 1800s. All you need to know is their motto: we never sleep. And what you may not know is that they are still around today. Like the outlaws, the Pinkertons were feared during their time, and their legend is mythologized in books, TV shows, and movies. But what is the real story? Were the Pinkertons an organization feared more than the outlaws? Or was their watchful eye not as all-seeing as we believed? Let's find out. But before we do, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. The origins of the Pinkertons. Let's start at the beginning by talking about the man who founded this group, Allan Pinkerton. He was not born in America, but in Glasgow, Scotland. He had already come from a family of enforcers, with his father, William Pinkerton, being a retired policeman, so one could say it was a family business. At first, however, it seemed Allan would go his own way, instead of having his trade be a cooper or someone who produces casks and barrels. In 1842, he emigrated to the United States, but his career seemed unchanged. Near Chicago, in Dundee Township, he built a cabin with the intention of starting a cooperative. However, he became involved in American activism. He worked with Chicago abolitionist leaders, and his home was even an underground railroad stop. His true calling came when he encountered counterfeiters while looking for trees to create barrel staves. Not much is known about these counterfeiters, but they may have been involved with the Banditti of the Prairie, a notorious outlaw organization. Pinkerton decided to go to the law, and the sheriff soon arrested him. Afterward, he became involved with the authorities. In 1850, he formed the Northwestern Police Agency with Chicago attorney Edward Rucker. Eventually, this organization became the Pinkerton Detective Agency. The organization resulted from several factors. First, the lawlessness on the expanding frontier. But the second reason was much more controversial: business control. Employers needed a private eye to solve labor disputes, and the Pinkertons delivered, sleuthing and investigating any and all employees to ensure that they upheld the law. One unique tidbit that set the Pinkerton Agency apart was that they hired women and minorities shortly after inception. This was because they were great at being spies, uncommon at this time. The organization also provided security for many important figures, from the railways to the president-elect himself, Abraham Lincoln. The Baltimore Plot. The plot involved an attempt to assassinate then-President-elect Lincoln, and Allan Pinkerton helped escort the president during a whistle-stop tour. While Lincoln would eventually be assassinated, it wasn't there, so this event skyrocketed the Pinkertons' popularity. More and more of the public became aware of the Pinkerton Agency as a result of them stopping this assassination. Their legacy is still visible today. Do you know the term private eye? While not coined by the Pinkertons themselves, the term has roots in its logo, which was an eye. While the all-seeing eye has been a trope far beyond the Pinkertons, the organization popularized the idea of an eye being used for surveillance. Around this time, Allan also served in the Secret Service Intelligence Division, known as the War Department in the U.S. This would be the precedence to the Secret Service we know about today, tasked with providing security to current and former U.S. presidents. While it would be formed after Lincoln's assassination, the agency would prove to be a big part of the protective elements that our presidents still use today. Allan himself would die in 1884 at the age of 64. While the man had gained many enemies over the years, which we'll discuss later, his cause of death was attributed to several other factors. Some reports say he died from a stroke he had a year prior, or malaria, but the most well-told tale is that he slipped on the pavement, bit his tongue, and died from gangrene. During his death, he was trying to create a system to centralize identification records for criminals. Nowadays, the FBI has a similar database. Now, let's talk about some cases of the Pinkertons hunting down the biggest outlaws in the West. Some of the outlaws the Pinkertons hunted. Let's first talk about Butch Cassidy, a train robber who led a group called the Wild Bunch. And wild they were, robbing people for over a decade. It seemed the law could not stop them. But then the Pinkertons' eyes saw them. This was partially thanks to Tom Horn, who was a killer hired by the Pinkertons, who heard about their exploits thanks to Bill Speck, an explosives expert. Charlie Siringo was a detective at the Pinkertons who joined after witnessing the Haymarket riots in Chicago. For the next few years, the Pinkertons pursued Butch Cassidy and his group. The Pinkertons were so persistent that Butch Cassidy knew he could not fight them all. However, he did not want to be arrested or go out in a blaze of glory, so he fled to South America. To this day, it's unknown what truly became of Butch Cassidy, but it's believed he died in a shootout with the Bolivian army. Another gang the Pinkertons hunted was the Reno Gang, which robbed several trains during the Civil War. One of the safes they robbed was insured by the Adams Express Company. To pay the insurance, the Pinkertons hired the Pinkertons to hunt down the gang. The gang encountered the Pinkertons several times. They managed to arrest John Reno, Frank Reno, Albert Perkins, and Miles Ogle, who were gang members. However, all of them broke out of prison. It seemed this gang wouldn't learn their lesson. At some point, the Pinkertons realized that if prison wasn't enough to put these gang members down, the Reaper would have to do the work. In 1868, 6 members robbed a train owned by the Ohio and Mississippi, and the Pinkertons were waiting. Bullets flew, and after they hit several members, the gang fled. A similar situation happened again during a July train robbery. Eventually, their reign was put to an end, but not by the Pinkertons, but by vigilante lynchings. Several unidentified people lynched the Reno gang members, and it caused a public uproar. It did not help that the lynchings happened after the gang members were captured. It begs the question, did the gang members, who fled from prison several times, get what they deserved? Or should justice always be dealt out by the hands of the law? Another gang the Pinkertons hunted was the James Younger Gang, consisting of Jesse and Frank James. The Pinkertons were once again involved. However, the James Younger Gang seemed to get the upper hand, escaping or sometimes killing the Pinkerton members. One example is when the Adams Express Company hired the Pinkertons to pursue the James brothers after they allegedly robbed one of their safes. The agent on the case was Joseph W. Witcher. However, his body was found shot to death. John Boyle and Louis J. Lull, 2 other Pinkerton agents, went along with Deputy Sheriff Edwin B. Daniels. However, they were ambushed by the gang. Daniels was killed while the 2 agents accidentally shot and killed each other. This incident brought much embarrassment to the Pinkerton name, and they wanted revenge. On January 25, 1875, the Pinkertons went to the James farm in Kearney, Missouri, with one motive: revenge. Take no prisoners, burn it all down. They threw an incendiary device into the farmhouse. It rolled inside the house, made contact with a fireplace, and exploded. The blast hurt 2 James members, but not the members they expected. Zerelda Samuel, the mother of the James boys, was caught in the explosion, which nearly severed her right arm, and her arm had to be amputated. Here is a photo of her without her right arm, but that wasn't the only person who was caught in the explosion. Archie Samuel, the half-brother of the Jameses, wasn't so lucky. He perished in the explosion. He was only 9 years old. Later, Daniel Askew, their neighbor, was shot dead by someone. It's expected he assisted the Pinkertons in their raid, and this was revenge for the loss of their half-brother and for gravely wounding their mother. A mother maimed and a child dead. A possible informant was shot as revenge. This incident was a stain on the legacy of the Pinkertons. Allan Pinkerton, instead of upping the ante even further, decided to call the chase off. So, as you can see with these examples, the Pinkertons weren't exactly a merciless killing machine of an organization. They often suffered losses. While they scared Butch Cassidy away, he was not captured or killed by them. While they won many matches with the Reno Gang, mob justice ultimately put an end to their reign, and their involvement with the James Younger Gang was embarrassment after embarrassment. We do not say this to downplay the Pinkertons, but to show that they weren't perfect. But even with their failures, the organization was greatly feared. Let's look at why. How the Pinkertons revolutionized pursuit. The Pinkertons were pioneers of several pursuit methods that are still used today. First, the Rogues Gallery. This is when the police keep a collection of photos or mugshots of their criminals. In the 1800s, this was a new concept, and the Pinkertons managed to get their hands on as many photos of their rogues as possible. Allan Pinkerton established the Rogues Gallery in 1855, which had a photo and a detailed description of the criminal. Everything, from their modus operandi to their hiding places and associates, was on this gallery. This gallery gave them an upper hand that many detective and police agencies did not have at the time. The Pinkertons were also masters of disguises. One example was Kate Warren. She was an agent who protected President-elect Lincoln. During this, she would take on several disguises, such as posing as a wealthy Southern lady. She was also the reason for the organization's phrase, "We never sleep," as she did not sleep while escorting Lincoln. Another example of spying is during the Civil War. Allan Pinkerton went under the alias E.J. Allen and created spy rings, with the goal of finding anyone with Confederate sympathies. He even found escaped slaves and would interview them for information about the Confederates. Finally, the Pinkertons were ubiquitous. The organization was once bigger than the U.S. Army itself. Think of how large and powerful the U.S. Army is nowadays, and that's hard to believe. By the end of the 19th century, the organization had over 2,000 detectives and 30,000 reserves. Some states, like Ohio, outlawed them altogether because of their strength. The Wild West was a period where you could murder someone, rob a bank, and then start a new life in the next town over, and people wouldn't know. However, the Pinkertons made it so that a person could be traced. They could not leave their past behind. It would catch up to them, usually through a hired goon who would pursue them to the edges of the earth. So, despite their flaws, the Pinkertons were a very feared organization. And for the most part, the public seemed to side with them often. They were the heroes in this story, taking on the scum of the country, people who would kill and terrorize just for a quick buck, people who refused to be a part of the working class. The Pinkertons went after the outlaws, not people who made a living doing an honest day's work. But what happens when the Pinkertons decide to go after the workers? The strike-breaking Pinkertons. Enter Carnegie Steel. This steel company was one of the biggest names in the late 1800s, thriving as the Industrial Revolution went into overtime. They knew how to make revolutionary technology, such as open hearth furnaces, and could produce steel at a rapid pace. They were growing, and so was the workforce, but the workers weren't seeing the money trickle down. Instead, their wages went down as their profits went up. So the workers did what any disgruntled employees should do: go on strike. Seems reasonable, but there was just one problem. The government had another resource they used to subdue these strikes. In 1871, Congress gave $50,000 to the Department of Justice, over $1.3 million by today's standards, to create a sub-organization in order to find and prosecute those violating federal laws. Though a sizable amount, it was not enough for the unit. Strikes were growing, and order needed to be restored. Who did they call to fill in the gaps? The Pinkertons. Information leaked on the involvement of the Pinkertons, and even some lawmakers were pushing against these contracts. But some companies saw the Pinkertons as an invaluable resource, able to engage in crackdowns against these striking workers. One example was the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, known by some as the Great Upheaval. The strike began in West Virginia after the Baltimore and Ohio B and O Railroad cut wages 3 times in 1 year. The strike then grew to a 52-day ordeal, eventually put down by militias, the National Guard, along with some federal troops. The pressure of putting together railroads combined with the lowered wages led other states to take to the picket lines, including in New York, Illinois, Maryland, and Missouri. Political unrest grew. It is estimated that 100 people were killed in the unrest surrounding the events. Strikes included marches, blocking traffic, train yard arson, and mass protests by many railroad workers across all lines. The Pinkerton detectives, along with the National Guard and other resources, worked to break the strike. As a result of these strikes, B&O did found an employee relief association in order to provide benefits, which included health care and death benefits should the employee die on the job. It also established a pension plan along with other initiatives later implemented. While the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 demonstrated the power of the Pinkertons, it was what happened 15 years later that caught more attention and public scrutiny. In 1892, the Homestead strike incident happened. Chairman Henry Clay Frick hired 300 agents to help break the strike and reopen the Homestead Steel Works plant to non-union workers. The Pinkertons acted in secret, being transported via river barges at night, but the Union, the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers was ready. They alerted the strikers who assembled on the barges. It was a confrontation between Pinkertons and strikers, and both were armed. Shots were fired. Gunpowder filled the air. After a long battle, the agents surrendered. Up to 7 people were killed, 35 were wounded, and over 300 agents were captured during the skirmish. It is speculation on who shot first during this skirmish. One resource says that the workmen fired on the detectives the moment the Pinkerton men climbed up. In another response, one published in the New York Times, it was the Pinkertons that shot first, wounding a man named William Foy. While the Pinkertons set up to shoot more of the workers, many protested. Along the riverbank, the crowd began to surround, calling on the strikers to kill the Pinkertons. Many of these Pinkerton agents were people trying to make do. One of the agents was a guy named A.L. Wells, who joined this expedition that earned $2.50 a day to make enough money during the summer months. Barges were set on fire, many were shot at, sunk, and strikers did everything that they could. Eventually, they did surrender, and they asked to speak to the strikers. None of the Pinkerton agents were charged with murder even after surrender, per their agreement. The public was divided on the aftermath of this situation. Members of the press condemned the strikers for their violence against the agents. However, the American public sympathized with the strikers and condemned the Pinkertons for being goons of a powerful company, doing their dirty work just because of a government contract and getting off with a simple release after surrendering. The incident caught the attention of Congress, which in 1893 signed the Anti-Pinkerton Act. This bill made it more difficult for the federal government to hire mercenaries or private investigators. Also, a bridge that connected the Pittsburgh suburbs of Munhall and Rankin was built and was dubbed the Pinkertons' Surrender Bridge. This strike was a turning point in labor, and the public perception of this organization as a whole, which many saw as the good guys, soon changed, skewering their perception and regarding them as nothing more than government guard dogs sent to do their dirty work. One song, "Father Was Killed by the Pinkerton Men," became an anthem in labor culture. One section of this song goes as follows: God help them tonight in their hour of affliction, praying for him whom they'll ne'er see again. Hear the poor orphans tell their sad story. Father was killed by the Pinkerton men. This incident is one that we could flesh out into a full video talking about the history of this company. So if you want us to do so, let us know. For now, let's look at the Pinkertons in modern times, legacy, and the Pinkertons in modern day. The Pinkertons have had quite a reputation in media, from dime store novels to movies to even video games. If you've consumed any Western media, you've probably seen a story that depicts the Pinkertons in some way, and depending on the story, the depiction may be different, but it usually follows similar tropes. The tropes usually involve the Pinkertons being feared agents. Even when the Pinkertons are the protagonists, their methods make them more anti-heroes than anything. Now, the Pinkertons are an organization that you may think dissolved sometime at the turn of the 20th century. But no, they are still around to this day. 2025 marks 175 years since the organization was created, and even though they don't have the influence they had all those years ago, they are still causing controversy to this day. Nowadays, the Pinkertons are involved with risk management, executive protection, threat intelligence, and responding to active shooters. While these activities seem more innocuous than the Pinkertons of old, they have caused plenty of controversies in just the past decade alone. Let's look at some. A lawsuit over a video game. Red Dead Redemption 2 was released in 2018 and became an instant classic in gaming. Set in 1899, it features a mixture of fictional and real characters, including the Pinkertons. In December 2018, Securitas AB, which is the parent company of the Pinkertons, got into a legal battle with Take-Two Interactive, which owns the rights to Red Dead Redemption 2, threatening legal action over the use of the Pinkerton name in that game. Despite the fact that many Western media outlets have used the Pinkertons, Securitas AB demanded royalties. However, Take-Two disagreed, pointing out how vital the Pinkertons were to a game that tried to have a realistic portrayal of the Old West. The claim was soon withdrawn, but this isn't the only time they were involved in geek culture. More on that in a second. In more serious stories, the Pinkertons have been hired in modern times to to bust unions. Both Amazon and Starbucks have used the Pinkertons to some degree to spy on or help to bust unions. Another incident in 2020 involved Matthew Doloff, a Pinkerton contracted security guard. He shot and killed Lee Keltner, who was a conservative protester. This was during the 2020 protests, when tensions were high. Doloff had been contracted to protect a 9 News camera crew who were covering the protests. During a confrontation with Keltner, Keltner had slapped Doloff and then sprayed him with bear spray. Doloff fought back by shooting and killing Keltner. Any charges against him were eventually dropped. While some may argue that this was an act of self-defense, the tensions surrounding the political climate at the time and the reputation of the Pinkertons meant that not everyone was on Doloff's side. A more humorous case of Pinkertons being used was when Wizards of the Coast, a company best known for owning fantasy role-playing properties like Magic the Gathering. Well, in 2023, YouTuber Dan Cannon got his hands on some Magic cards before the official release date and was showing them off. Wizards of the Coast tried to contact Dan to delete the videos, but did not get a response. Finally, they hired the Pinkertons to seize the cards from Dan. Questions about the Baltimore plot. Several questions have been raised about the legitimacy of the Baltimore plot in modern times, but also shortly after the incident. One example is from Ward Hill Layman, Lincoln's bodyguard. He believed that the plot to assassinate Lincoln didn't exist at all, and that the Pinkertons had made this up to offer their services to Lincoln and gain political clout from it. Several historians have questioned this as well over the years. While Lincoln had enemies, and John Wilkes Booth proved that, it's also possible that Lincoln was not in danger. In fact, having Pinkerton's protection was considered controversial at the time, with some people saying that the president's having a secret group protect him was a sign that he was a coward. This period was when the president was much more approachable to the public. Nowadays, having bodyguards for the president, even after their presidency, is normal. This shows that the Pinkertons still have some power in modern times, be it to bust the modern-day equivalents of Carnegie Steel or to get some trading cards back. Were they more feared than the outlaws? Like many interesting figures in the Old West, the Pinkertons have a complex history. The story of Allan Pinkerton is an example of the American dream, where a man can emigrate to America with humble goals, only to make it big. However, like many lawmen in the USA, Allan and the Pinkertons themselves have a more ambiguous morality than just good or bad. The Pinkertons arrested, stymied, or scared off some of the baddest bandits in the West. However, they could also be vindictive, hurting, or killing innocent women and children, especially if it's because a company told them to. When it came to their attacks on strikers just asking for a fairer wage or better conditions, questions about their own morality soon arose. In modern times, the Pinkertons are still doing these activities, committing corporate espionage and deterring people from engaging in certain activities if a company believes they are wrong. So, in a way, the Pinkertons were more feared than the outlaws, and still are to some degree. That being said, one may also argue that the Pinkertons are morally neutral and are just providing a service. They'll do good things or bad things if the price is right. At that point, who is more at fault, the Pinkertons doing their job or the people who paid them to do that job? It's a fascinating subject for sure, and one that we invite you to discuss. So leave your thoughts about the Pinkertons below. And once again, like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications to be the first to see our next video.